A sharp tear opened in the sky above Times Square. At first it looked like a glitch on the giant screens. Then the air itself split. Blue light spilled out, and something fell. Metal. Smoke. Fire. The armored figure hit a glass wall, broke through 2 rows of windows, and bounced into the street. The crash sent people flying back. Cups and phones skidded across the pavement. For 1 second, nobody breathed. Then the armored man moved. His helmet was dented. One shoulder plate hung loose. A bright circle in his chest glowed steady, but the sound from his suit was rough, like it was hurting. He pushed himself up, slow and controlled. "Okay," he said, voice calm but annoyed. "That is not where I parked." A streetlight above him snapped and started to fall toward a crowd trapped behind a barrier. The armored man turned his head like a calculator. He raised his palm. A blue-white blast punched the pole sideways into an empty lane. It slammed into a taxi and crushed the hood, but it missed the people by a few feet. Screams turned into shocked laughter. Phones rose higher. Someone yelled, "Yo, Vought, you didn't tell us about this!" On the nearby Vought stage, the charity promo kept rolling. A soup with a perfect grin waved like nothing was wrong. Behind the stage, a crew member slipped, and a heavy stack of gear toppled. A small kid in a yellow hoodie was in the wrong place, staring at the falling metal. The armored man did not hesitate. His boots flared and he shot forward. He hit the falling stack with his shoulder and guided it away. Small pods popped from his forearm and snapped into the air, cutting cables with clean, sharp clicks. The whole mess dropped harmlessly onto an empty section of street. He grabbed the kid by the hoodie and lifted them back over the barrier. He set them down gently. The kid stared at the glowing eyes in the helmet. "Are you with Vought?" The armored man paused, then said, "No." A shadow drifted down over the street. Slow clapping, calm, confident. Homelander floated down like the air belonged to him. Perfect suit. Perfect cape. A smile built for billboards. Cameras swung toward him right away. Homelander's eyes traveled over the damaged armor. He kept the smile for the crowd. "Well," he said loudly, "that was a big entrance. You sure know how to make a scene." "I didn't mean to," the armored man said. He held his hands open, palms down, showing he was not aiming at anyone. "I'm just trying to keep people alive." Homelander drifted closer. Up close, his smile looked even more practiced. His eyes flicked toward a cameraman who had stumbled too close. The cameraman's feet lifted off the ground, just an inch. His face reddened. His hands clawed at the air. The crowd didn't notice. They were watching Homelander and the new guy. The armored man noticed. His head snapped to the cameraman. "Stop!" Homelander did not move. He spoke softly, still smiling. "Careful. You don't know how things work here." The armored man raised his palm, not at Homelander, but at the cameraman. A short pulse pushed the man back onto his feet. The cameraman stumbled away, coughing. Homelander's smile stayed, but it got thinner at the edges. "Interesting," he said. "You're fast. You're shiny. People love shiny." "I don't care what people love," the armored man said. "I care what you just did." His helmet tilted. Inside his HUD flashed warnings. Unknown pings. Someone was trying to talk to his suit. Someone was trying to get in. He looked at the crowd. Too many civilians. Too many phones. Too many ways for one bad second to become a tragedy. He made a choice. His boots roared. He blasted straight up between the buildings, vanishing into the clouds. Homelander watched him go, face still calm. Inside Vought Tower, far above the noise, Stan Edgar watched the live feed without blinking. "Find out what he is," Edgar said, "and get me the armor." Up in the cloud cover, the armored man hovered, scanning the city beneath him as the pings kept coming. "Okay," he muttered. "New rule. No Wi-Fi." The armored man stayed above the city until his suit stopped screaming at him. Clouds wrapped around him. The noise from the street faded into a dull hum. His HUD jittered with red warnings, then steadied. Power stable, flight stable, armor integrity. Not great. He dipped lower, careful, and found a rooftop with no people. He landed with a hard thud and took a slow breath. "Okay," he said again. But quieter now. Step 1. Figure out where I am. He looked out over the skyline. It was New York. It was also not his New York. There were towers he did not recognize. There were screens everywhere. The biggest building in the distance wore the word Vought like a crown. He raised his left hand and spoke into his suit. "Friday. Status." A woman's voice answered inside his helmet. Crisp, calm. Multiple system faults. External network activity detected. Attempts to handshake with suit protocols are ongoing. "Great," he muttered. "So someone is knocking on my door while I'm bleeding." He turned off every wireless link he could. He cut the suit's talk down to nothing but internal. The pings lessened, but they did not stop completely. Someone smart was still trying. He needed a hole, a place to hide, a place to fix the suit without 100 cameras watching. He took off again, low and fast, using the buildings like cover. He found an old industrial block near the river. One warehouse had broken windows and no lights. The roof was patched. The door was chained, but not well. He landed behind it and snapped the chain with one squeeze. Inside, it smelled like dust and old oil. He liked that. Dust did not tweet. He set down a small case from a compartment in his thigh plate and popped it open. Tools rolled out in perfect order. Then he looked around at the warehouse's own tools. A rusted wrench, a bent screwdriver, a spool of cheap wire. He made a sound halfway between a laugh and a sigh. "I'm going to die in here." He pulled a panel from his shoulder. A burnt circuit hissed. He tapped it with a finger. "This is embarrassing," he said, "to nobody and everybody. This is what I get for building a suit that can survive space but still hates potholes." He worked anyway. He sealed a leak in the shoulder joint. He rerouted power around a cracked line. He printed a thin brace plate using a small portable maker that sounded like a tired coffee machine. While the machine ran, he found a dusty office corner with a dead computer and a cracked monitor. He pulled the tower open, stared at the parts, and frowned. "Is this a museum?" he asked the air. Friday answered. "Hardware is significantly behind baseline expectations." "That's a nice way of saying it's bad," he said. "Okay, we go old school." He wired a direct line from his suit to the computer, bypassing the dead network card. He used a small data stick he carried like a habit. Then he booted the machine. It groaned. It took forever. He watched the loading bar like it was a personal insult. When the screen finally lit, he typed fast and pulled up news. Video. Social feeds. And there it was. Vought. Superheroes with clean smiles and perfect lighting. A shining tower. A brand that owned the word hero. He watched clip after clip. A speedster high-fiving kids. A woman glowing with light. A man in a cape floating like a god. Then he watched another clip, filmed by a shaky phone. The caped man's smile was the same. The thing he did in the corner of the frame was not. A shove. A lazy laser flick. A body falling. Tony's jaw tightened under the helmet. "That's not an accident," he said. He clicked deeper. He found lawsuits that vanished. Witnesses who changed their story. Families paid to go quiet. A pattern. He sat back on a dusty chair that creaked. "This place," he said softly, "is a costume party with a body count." The suit beeped. Another warning. Friday spoke. There was a new broadcast on multiple local channels. An alert. A live feed filled the screen. The same street. The same stage, Homelander smiling with a Vought banner behind him. "And now," Homelander said to the cameras, "we have to talk about a dangerous new threat." Tony stared at the screen. He watched himself, blurred and framed like a villain. Homelander's voice stayed warm. "An armored attacker caused property damage and put civilians at risk today. We are grateful no one was seriously hurt." Tony let out a short, humorless laugh. "Wow," he said, "that's bold?" Homelander continued, "If you see this person, do not approach. The 7 will handle it." A phone number appeared, a reward, a promise of safety. Tony shut the screen off with one jab. "So that's the game," he said. "You control the story, and you sell the ending." He stood, paced once, then stopped. He didn't like running from cameras. He also didn't like getting people killed because he wanted to win an argument. He needed allies. He hated that thought. He always did. It still came back. He moved to the warehouse door and peeked out. The street was quiet, but quiet didn't mean empty. Friday said, "Thermal signatures approaching. Multiple. Human. No visible powered activity." Tony's hand lifted. A small drone slid out of his back plate, silent as a thought. It slipped through a broken window and hovered outside. The drone's feed showed 4 figures creeping along the alley line. Not cops, not Vought security. They moved like people who had practiced sneaking. One was big, broad-shouldered, carrying something heavy under a coat. One was slimmer, nervous, checking corners too often. One had a steady walk, like a soldier. And one moved with a sharp, angry purpose, like he was already in a fight in his head. Tony watched them for 3 seconds and said, "Okay, this is either a rescue team or the worst group project I've ever seen." The door rattled once, then went still. A voice came from outside, low and rough. "Oi, Tin Man, we know you're in there." Tony blinked. "Tin Man?" The voice continued louder. "Open up, or we'll come in, and I promise you won't like how we say hello." Tony stepped back, keeping the warehouse wall between him and the door. He raised his palm toward the floor and sent a tiny pulse. A circle of faint blue lines flickered across the concrete. Motion sensors. Nothing lethal. Just alerts. He spoke through the door. "You have about 10 seconds to tell me why you're here." A beat of silence. Then the slim one spoke, voice higher, cautious. "We're not with Vought. We're trying to stop them." Tony's helmet tilted. "That's not a lot of information." The angry one snapped back. "It's more than you deserve. You show up, smash half a street, and now Homelander's doing a press tour about you. You're either the dumbest weapon Vought ever built, or you're trouble." Tony didn't answer right away. He listened to the footsteps. He listened to the breathing. The big one shifted weight like he was ready to rush. He made another choice. The warehouse door slid open by itself as he released the lock. 4 people entered fast. The angry one led. He was blonde, with a hard stare and a smile that did not feel friendly. A crowbar was in his hand like it belonged there. The slim one stayed half a step behind him, eyes wide, hands raised slightly to show he wasn't holding a gun. The steady one, dark skin, calm face, scanned the room like he was counting exits. The big one, carrying a duffel, looked like he could break a wall with his shoulder. Tony stood in the middle of the warehouse, still in armor, still damaged. His palms were open. The glowing circle in his chest lit the dust. The angry one pointed his crowbar. "Helmet off, now!" Tony's voice was flat. "No." The angry one's eyes narrowed. "You hiding a pretty face under there?" Tony almost smiled. Almost. Instead, he said, "I'm hiding my identity from people who want to steal my technology and use it to hurt others." The angry one stepped closer. "So you admit it's your tech?" Tony's head turned slightly toward the slim one. "You're the one who talked? What's your name?" The slim one swallowed. "Huey." Tony nodded once. "Hi, Huey. You should take 2 steps to the left." Huey frowned. "Why?" A thin line shot from Tony's wrist and snapped around the crowbar, yanking it sideways. At the same time, Tony fired a short burst at the floor in front of the angry one's boots. A sticky foam spread like fast glue. The angry one's boots locked to the concrete. His grin vanished. "What the?" Tony turned his other wrist. Another line snapped around the big one's duffel. It jerked open and spilled weapons onto the floor. The big one cursed and lunged. Tony didn't punch him. He pivoted and used the big man's momentum, letting him slam into a hanging chain. The chain wrapped around his shoulder and held him for a second like a net. The steady one reached for a pistol. Tony fired a pulse that killed the gun's electronics with a soft pop. The pistol clicked uselessly. The steady one froze, then slowly lowered the weapon anyway. The angry one fought the foam, muscles straining. "You smug!" Tony raised his palm toward the man's face, not firing, just holding it there. "Stop," Tony said. "Nobody dies today. That includes me, and it includes you." The warehouse went quiet, except for the portable maker printing Tony's braceplate in the corner. It made a cheery beep, like it didn't understand the mood. The slim one, Huey, stared at Tony's palm, then at the weapons on the floor. You could have killed us." Tony's voice softened by half a degree. "Yes." The angry one spat. "That's supposed to impress us?" Tony looked at him. "No. It's supposed to make this conversation possible." The steady one stepped forward, hands open. "Name's MM," he said. "Mother's milk. We're not cops. We're not Vought. We're what's left when the system doesn't work." Tony studied him. MM's eyes were tired but clear. The big one pulled against the chain and growled, "Let me go." Tony glanced at him. "And you are?" "Frenchie," the big one said through his teeth. Tony nodded. "Okay, Frenchie. Breathe. You'll live longer." The angry one yanked again, failing. "And you're what? A knight in a metal suit." Tony paused. There were names he could say. There was a life he could claim. But this world was already trying to turn him into a headline. If he gave them a name, it would become a product, or a target. He said, "I'm someone who made mistakes and is trying to fix them." The angry one scoffed. "Cute, I'm Billy Butcher." Tony let that sit for a second. The name fit the face. The energy. "I can unstick you," Tony said, "if you promise you're not going to swing that crowbar at my head again." Butcher's eyes flicked to the suit, hungry and angry at once. "Depends." Tony sighed. "Of course it does." He sent a small pulse. The foam softened. Butcher's boots came free with a wet peel. Butcher rolled his ankles and stepped closer anyway. "Here's the deal. Vought are liars. The 7 are monsters. And Homelander, I saw," Tony said. His voice went cold. He almost crushed a cameraman for fun. Butcher's grin returned, sharp. "Then you understand. You're either with us or you're in the way." Tony looked at all of them. Weapons on the floor. Fear behind the bravado. Anger like fuel. He thought of the kid in the yellow hoodie. He thought of the way Homelander's eyes had looked when nobody else was watching. He said, "I'm not joining a crusade, but I will not let that man keep doing this." Huey let out a breath like he'd been holding it for a year. "So, you're a good guy?" Tony tilted his helmet. "I'm trying." The sound of a car passing outside made everyone tense. Butcher waved toward the door. "You can try someplace safer than this." Tony's HUD flashed again. More pings. Different now. Smarter. Friday spoke quietly. External interest is increasing. Multiple surveillance patterns converging. Tony stared at the dark doorway. "They're looking for me." Butcher's eyes lit up with the wrong kind of excitement. Let them. MM shot him a look. Not with civilians around. Huey swallowed. What if they find you first? Tony looked back at his half-fixed shoulder and the cheap wires around the warehouse. The world here was loud. It was cruel. And it moved fast. Then I need a place to work, Tony said. Offline, quiet. No cameras. Butcher's smile faded into something real. You want a bunker? Tony hesitated, then nodded. I want a chance to stop them before they turn my tech into their next toy. An hour later, Tony rode in the back of a battered van with no logos. He stayed crouched, armored, too big for the space. Butcher sat up front, watching mirrors like he expected war to appear in them. Huey sat beside Tony, trying not to stare and failing. You really came from somewhere else? Huey asked. Tony didn't answer right away. He looked at the city sliding by. He saw Vought posters. He saw smiling faces on buses. He saw how many people believed. He said, yes. Huey's voice dropped. Are you famous where you're from? Tony almost made a joke. Almost. Then he thought of the last time he'd seen a crowd cheer for him. How easy it had felt. How dangerous. He said, I've been on TV? Butcher snorted from the front. Right. So you're a celebrity with a conscience. Tony looked toward the windshield. Something like that. The van stopped under an overpass, then turned into a hidden garage. A steel door rolled down behind them, cutting the city off. Inside was a rough safe house. Concrete walls, a table covered in maps, old weapons, a coffee maker that looked like it had survived a war. Tony stepped out and looked around. He saw the wiring, the ventilation, the security cameras that weren't actually connected to anything. He could not help himself. You people are going to get yourselves killed with this setup. MM bristled. It's worked so far. Tony walked to the wall panel, opened it, and stared at the mess of cables. He made a pained sound. Huey blinked. Is it that bad? Tony turned, hands spread. This isn't a system. This is a wish. Butcher laughed. He's judging your cables, MM. Tony pointed at the panel. You have 2 lines sharing 1 fuse. That's not brave. That's stupid. MM held up both hands. Okay, Mr. Metal, fix it. But do it fast. Tony nodded once. Gladly. He knelt, pulled out his tools, and started making order out of chaos. While Tony worked, Butcher and MM argued in low voices nearby. He's a walking nuke, Butcher said. We point him at Homelander. He's a person, MM said. And if he's a person, he gets a say. Butcher scoffed. People die while you're being polite. Huey sat across from Tony, watching the suit's shoulder plate open and close like a living thing. You have an AI? Huey asked. Tony glanced up. Yes. Huey's eyes widened. Like a person in the suit? Tony paused. More like a very smart assistant. She keeps me from flying into buildings. Friday spoke, just loud enough for Huey to hear. Correction. I keep him from flying into buildings most of the time. Huey jumped, then smiled despite himself. Okay, that's kind of cool. Tony went back to wiring. He didn't notice the small camera in the corner until it blinked. Not their camera. A pinhole, stuck behind a vent. Tony's hand froze. Friday said, "Foreign device detected. Transmitting." Tony stood so fast the chair skidded. He walked to the vent, ripped it open, and crushed the tiny camera in his fist. Butcher's head snapped up. "What is it?" Tony held up the broken device. "Someone found your place." MM's face tightened. "How?" Tony's helmet angled toward the ceiling. "Because you have security like a paper umbrella." Butcher reached for his coat. "Then we move." Tony shook his head. Not yet. Butcher stared. What do you mean, not yet? Tony stepped closer, voice firm. If we run every time they look at us, they control the map. I need an hour. I need to finish repairs. And I need to cut their access. Frowned. Can you do that? Tony looked at the crushed camera, then at the mess of wires, then at the people staring at him like he was either salvation or a bomb. He said, yes. He didn't say it with pride. He said it like a promise. Huey swallowed. So, what do we call you? Tony paused. He looked down at his suit. A small mark near the inner plate was scratched, half hidden. Old habit. Old brand. A name that would echo if it got out. He rubbed his thumb over it without thinking. Huey's eyes followed the motion. He leaned in, squinting. Stark. Tony froze for a fraction of a second. Butcher's head snapped toward him. Stark? Tony exhaled. Tony, he said, like giving away a piece of himself. Tony Stark. The room went still. Huey's mouth fell open. Like Iron Man? Tony didn't correct him. He didn't confirm it either. He just looked at them and said, in my world, that name comes with problems. In yours, it's going to come with worse. Outside, far away, sirens wailed. And somewhere in the city, Vought's machines kept searching. By morning, the city had decided what it wanted the story to be. It played on every screen, on the subway, in diners, in the corner of people's phones, while they pretended not to watch. A slow-motion clip of an armored figure crashing through glass, a freeze frame of a blue blast, a red circle drawn around a falling sign that Tony had actually pushed away from people, but the voiceover didn't mention that. Unknown armored attacker, the anchor said, face serious, possible foreign weapon, possible terrorist. Under the clip, a clean graphic slid onto the screen. Report sightings. Stay back. Trust the 7. The name came next. Iron Terror, another host said, smiling like it was catchy. That's what people are calling him online. In the safe house, Huey stared at the TV like it might bite him. That's not fair, Huey said. Butcher snorted. Fair doesn't exist here. Tony stood in the corner, his helmet off now, hair a mess, eyes tired. He had refused to take it off last night until he was sure the room had no hidden devices left. He had found 2 more. He had crushed both. Now the armor was open around him like a mechanic's dream and a nightmare at the same time. Plates hovered on small magnetic hooks. His tools were laid out in perfect lines. He looked at the TV and made a small, unhappy sound. They're using footage from 5 different angles. None of those cameras belong to civilians. Crossed his arms. Vought owns the street. Tony's mouth tightened. And the narrative. Friday spoke from a speaker Tony had rigged into the room. Network traffic indicates coordinated amplification. Multiple bot patterns. Paid influence accounts. Huey blinked. Bots? Butcher waved a hand. Fake people. Real lies. Tony reached into the armor's open shoulder and snapped a connector into place. They're trying to force me into a mistake on camera. Butcher leaned against the table, eyes sharp. Then don't make one. Let's go find the caped prick and do the world a favor. Tony didn't look up. No. Butcher's smile turned hard. Excuse me? Tony kept working. I'm not here to assassinate people in the street. Butcher stepped closer, voice rising. He's a monster, mate. You saw it. He'll kill you. He'll kill us. And he'll kill anyone he feels like. You want to wait for him to do it again? Tony finally looked up. His eyes were steady. I want to stop him without becoming him. Butcher stared like Tony had spoken a different language. Stepped between them, calm but firm. We do this smart, he said. No civilians, no sloppy. Huey swallowed. Do you think they're coming here? Tony answered without hesitation. Yes. As if the world heard him, Friday spoke again. Incoming broadcast. VOD emergency press event. Live. Tony tapped a button, and the safe house screen lit up. Homelander stood in front of a line of American flags. Behind him, the rest of the 7 formed a perfect wall of color and smiles. Homelander spoke like a dad telling a bedtime story. We want everyone to stay calm. We are handling the situation. A-Train stood with his arms crossed, jaw tight. The Deep smiled too hard. Maeve's face was blank, but her eyes looked distant. Starlight stood near the edge, posture stiff, smile small. Her eyes flicked once, just once, as if she was searching for something off camera. Tony felt it, a tiny crack in the performance. Homelander continued, We have reason to believe this armored attacker is targeting VOT assets. Tony muttered, I'm targeting your crimes. Homelander smiled. If you see him, call us. Do not engage. The 7 are trained for this. Butcher laughed under his breath. Trained. The broadcast ended with a clean promise. The 7 would bring Iron Terror in peacefully. Tony shut the feed off. They're going to stage a capture, Tony said. Frowned. How do you know? Tony pointed toward the city beyond the safe house. Because if they actually cared about safety, they'd tell people to clear the streets. They're not. They want crowds. Huey's face went pale. They want witnesses. Tony nodded. They want a public win. Butcher's grin returned, sharper than before. So we give him a public loss. Tony shook his head. No, we keep people safe and we leave them no clean footage. Butcher rolled his eyes. You're adorable. Tony turned back to his suit. Friday, give me a live map. Crowd density, cameras, drones. A grid of the city appeared. Red dots for people, blue for cameras, yellow for airborne drones. Friday said, VOT surveillance drones are increasing over major intersections. Potential intercept points are forming. Looked at the map and swore quietly. They're hurting. Tony tapped the screen and circled a path. We move now. We go through service tunnels. We stay under. Butcher leaned in, eyes glittering. Where are we going? Tony didn't look away from the map. Someplace with fewer cameras and more exits. Huey whispered, That's like nowhere. Tony glanced at him. Welcome to my morning. They moved fast. Tony suited up as they walked. Plates snapped into place around him like a closing jaw. His helmet sealed with a hiss. His chest light brightened. The armor looked cleaner than last night, but the dents were still there. He hadn't fixed them on purpose. A perfect suit would invite a perfect fight. He wanted room to move and think. They slipped into a maintenance tunnel, then a subway service route. The air smelled like damp concrete and metal. Butcher complained about the smell. Tony ignored him. Up above, the city was loud. People gathered in clusters because screens told them to. VOT news vans parked at corners like sharks. Drones hovered near billboards, their lenses glinting. Tony's suit kept pinging him with near misses. Cameras catching heat trails. Drones sniffing for unusual metal signatures. They came out on a side street near a busy plaza. Not Times Square, but still crowded. Still bright. Still full of eyes. Tony hated it. He stepped out first, scanning. Butcher and followed, blending into the crowd as best they could. Huey stayed close to Annie's old jacket Butcher had thrown at him, like that could make him invisible. A voice crackled in Tony's ear. Not Friday. A public speaker on a streetlight. Attention, a bright voice said. Please remain calm. The 7 are here to protect you. Tony's head snapped up. The sky above the plaza shifted as shadows passed over the sun. Homelander hovered high, centered like a spotlight. Below him, A-Train stood on the roof edge of a nearby building. The Deep and Maeve landed on opposite sides of the street, boxing the crowd in without anyone realizing. Starlight walked out of a Vought van, smile tight, eyes scanning. Tony's suit recorded everything. He forced himself to breathe. Butcher muttered, "Showtime!" Homelander's voice boomed across the plaza, warm and strong. "Iron Terror," he called. "We know you're here. Come out. No one needs to get hurt." Tony watched the crowd. People turned in circles, confused, excited, scared. He saw a mother gripping her child's hand too hard. He saw a teenage boy holding a phone up with shaking fingers. He saw how many people were about to be used as props. Tony stepped forward, not into the center, not into the open, just enough that the cameras would catch his armor between bodies. Gasps rippled through the plaza. Phones rose like a wave. Homelander smiled wider. "There you are." Tony's voice came out through his suit, amplified but controlled. "Clear the area." Homelander laughed, friendly. "We're handling it." Tony's helmet tilted. "You're staging it." A-Train's voice cut in from the roof, loud and cocky. "Yo, Iron Terror, you want to talk? Talk. But you don't get to order us around." Tony watched A-Train's feet. He watched the tension in his calves. He watched the angle of his body. He was going to sprint. The second Homelander gave the cue. Tony spoke again, aimed at the crowd this time. "Everyone, walk away. Don't run. Just move." A few people listened. Most didn't. Some laughed. Some cheered for Homelander. But one group started to drift back. A mother pulled her kid. An old man grabbed his wife's arm. That was enough to matter. Homelander's eyes narrowed a fraction. "You're scaring people." Tony didn't flinch. Good. Fear keeps them alive. Homelander's smile fell away for a heartbeat, then returned. "Okay," he said, voice still sweet. "We tried the nice way." The air snapped. Homelander dropped like a missile. Tony boosted backward, skimming low over the crowd. His suit flared, pushing air and dust out in a controlled blast to open space. People stumbled, startled, but they didn't fall into each other. Homelander hit the ground where Tony had been and cracked the pavement. A-Train vanished from the roof in a blur. Tony's HUD lit with a prediction line. He turned and fired a thin net of sticky microcables across the street, low to the ground. A-Train slammed into the cables and flipped, skidding hard. Sparks flew from his shoes. His face hit the asphalt. The crowd screamed. Tony didn't look away. He fired a second pulse that hardened the cables around A-Train like a quick cage. A-Train cursed, furious and embarrassed. That's cheating." Tony's voice was flat. "No, that's planning." Maeve rushed in next, fast and strong, swinging a fist that could break concrete. Tony angled a shield plate up and took the hit. His feet dug in. The ground cracked under him. The impact rang through his suit like a bell. Tony didn't counterpunch her face. He blasted sideways, using thrusters to slide out of the line, and clipped her shoulder with a non-lethal shock pulse that numbed her arm for a second. Maeve stumbled, surprised. She stared at him like she couldn't decide if she hated him or respected him. The Deep charged from the left, trying to tackle Tony from behind like he was part of a football play. Tony lifted his palm and fired a short burst of foam straight into the Deep's face mask. The foam expanded and clogged the filter. The Deep choked, flailed and fell to his knees, ripping at the foam with gloved fingers. A few people in the crowd laughed before they caught themselves. Butcher, half hidden behind a vendor stand, muttered, "That one's almost worth it." Starlight stood near the Vought van, eyes wide. She raised her hands, light building around her fingers. Tony's HUD tagged her as unknown-powered individual. The scans flagged energy output and muscle density. He also saw her face, the tension, the way she aimed her glow not at him, but at the street lamps above the crowd, like she was thinking about angles too. Tony had 1 second to decide, threat or ally. He chose neither. He chose caution. "Don't," Tony warned, voice low. Starlight hesitated. Her eyes met the glowing eyes of his helmet. Then Homelander grabbed Tony from behind. It happened so fast, the crowd only saw the end. A blur, a snap, and then Tony was yanked backward like a toy. Homelander's hand clamped around Tony's throat plate, fingers denting the armor. Homelander leaned close, voice for Tony only. "You're making me look bad." Tony's suit alarm screamed, pressure rising, structural integrity dropping. Tony didn't panic. He'd been in worse grips. He'd also learned not to fight strength with strength. He fired his boot thrusters straight down. The blast hit the pavement like a hammer and launched both of them upward. They shot above the rooftops, away from the crowd, leaving wind and debris behind. Homelander tightened his grip mid-air. "Cute trick." Tony's chest light flared. He fired a repulsor burst point blank into Homelander's face. Homelander's head snapped back. His grip loosened for half a heartbeat. Tony twisted free and rocketed away. Homelander followed without effort, closing the distance like gravity was optional. They broke through low clouds, and the city dropped away beneath them. Sirens sounded like tiny toys from up here. Tony turned, hovering. His palms glowed. Homelander hovered too, arms relaxed, cape fluttering. Up close, there was no crowd and no cameras. Homelander's smile vanished. "You're not from here," Homelander said, voice flat. "I can tell." Tony didn't answer. Homelander's eyes flicked over the suit. "But you're loud, and you're in my city." Tony's voice came out steady. "You tried to kill a cameraman yesterday." Homelander shrugged like it was nothing. He was in the way. Tony felt something hot rise in his chest. Not fear, not even anger. Something colder. "That's the problem," Tony said. "You don't even hear yourself." Homelander's eyes narrowed. "I don't need to." He moved. Homelander hit Tony like a truck. Tony's armor took the blow, and the force threw him backward through the air. He corrected. Thrusters firing. Stabilizers whining. Homelander came again, faster, punching the suit's chest plate with enough power to make the arc reactor stutter. Tony's HUD flashed red. His suit could take it, but not forever. Tony fired a cluster of micro-missiles. They exploded around Homelander, not to kill, but to blind with smoke and shock. Homelander burst through the smoke, annoyed. His eyes lit red. Tony raised a forearm shield. The lasers hit. They didn't cut through instantly. Tony's shield was built for heat. The metal glowed. His suit screamed as the temperature climbed. Tony angled the shield, redirecting the beam into the sky, then cut his own thrusters and dropped. Homelander followed. Tony spun mid-fall and fired a repulsor blast into Homelander's chest, then another into his jaw, then another into his shoulder. Each hit shoved Homelander back inches, not because Homelander was weak, but because physics still existed. Tony used those inches like money. He built distance. He changed angles. He forced Homelander to chase. Homelander's face tightened with real irritation. "You're not even trying to win," Homelander snapped. Tony's voice was harsh. "I'm trying to keep people from dying because you're throwing a tantrum." Homelander lunged, grabbed Tony's ankle, and whipped him. Tony spun like a thrown hammer and crashed into the side of a skyscraper. Glass shattered. Tony punched through into an empty office floor. He rolled, hit a desk, and skidded to a stop. The carpet caught fire under his boot jets. He stood up as Homelander floated through the broken wall like it was nothing. Tony's armor was scratched and scorched. The heat shield on his forearm was half melted. Tony's suit scanned the office. No people. Good. Homelander looked around, annoyed. "You picked a boring room." Tony's helmet angled. "It's empty. That's the point." Homelander moved again, a blur, fist swinging for Tony's head. Tony raised both arms. A set of hard braces snapped out from his forearms and locked around Homelander's wrist and elbow like a sudden trap. At the same time, Tony fired magnetic clamps into the floor and wall. The clamps latched to the braces and yanked. Homelander's arm got pulled sideways, just enough to throw his punch offline. Homelander's fist smashed into the wall instead, carving a deep crater. Homelander stared at his trapped arm, then at Tony, like he couldn't believe someone had tried to restrain him. Then he laughed, a short, cruel laugh. "Oh," Homelander said, "you're fun." He flexed. The braces bent, the clamps screamed, the metal tore free like paper. Tony boosted backward through the office and out the far side, blasting through another window. Homelander followed, faster, smiling now like a kid with a new toy. Tony heard it before he saw it. Voices on the roof above, filming. His stomach dropped. He shot upward, putting his body between Homelander and the rooftop. Homelander's eyes lit again. Tony fired a wide pulse into the rooftop edge, not at the people, but at the concrete. It cracked and dropped a curtain of dust between them and the fight. "Get down!" Tony shouted. The civilians screamed and ducked, dropping phones. Homelander snarled, "Stop protecting them!" Tony's voice went quiet. "No." He didn't try to overpower Homelander. He knew he couldn't in a clean way. Instead, he changed the problem. He fired a swarm of small drones from his back. They split into a ring around the building and projected false heat signatures in different directions. The drones mimicked the suit's metal reflection and engine sound. 5 armored blurs shot off into the sky. Homelander's eyes narrowed. He lasered one, and it exploded into scraps. He chased another, and it cut a hard angle and vanished behind a tower. Tony was already gone. He dropped low, between buildings, using the maze of the city like cover. He cut thrusters, then pulsed them in short bursts to avoid leaving a steady trail. He heard Homelander's sonic boom somewhere above, angry and searching. On the ground, Butcher watched the sky from behind a bus stop, teeth clenched. Huey crouched beside him, shaking. Is he dead? Butcher didn't answer right away. He watched a drone explode in the clouds like a dying firework. MM's voice came through a small earpiece. "Move! Vought vans are closing!" Butcher swore. "We were supposed to get a win." Huey whispered, "We got people out." Butcher glared at him, but his eyes flicked toward the crowd running away, alive. "Fine," Butcher snapped. "We take the win we can." Starlight stood near the Vought van, watching the chaos. Her hands glowed faintly, but she didn't fire. Her eyes tracked the civilians first, not the cameras. She saw Butcher's group slip away like shadows. Her lips pressed into a line. In Vought Tower, Stan Edgar watched the live feeds with the volume low. The cut angles, the smoke, the blurry shots. Homelander's face, furious in the sky. Edgar's assistant spoke fast. "Sir, the narrative team is already pushing that the armored attacker assaulted the 7. Edgar didn't look away from the screen. "Of course they are." Another assistant hurried in. "We recovered debris from one of his drones, and a fragment from his shoulder plate. It fell during the first exchange." Edgar's eyes finally shifted. Not excited, not shocked, just focused. "Bring it to R&D, Edgar said, "and keep it quiet." The assistant nodded and ran. Edgar leaned back, hands folded. Above the city. Homelander hovered, breathing hard. His smile was gone. His eyes were bright with anger. He wanted a clean win. He wanted a body on camera. He wanted worship. Instead, he had smoke and dust and a disappearing target. Down in a tunnel entrance, Tony landed hard and slid behind a service door. His suit sealed the door after him. Darkness wrapped around him. Friday's voice was steady. You avoided civilian casualties. Suit damage is moderate. External hostility is increasing. Tony's breath came fast. He rested his forehead against the cold metal of his own helmet for a second. Then he forced himself to stand up straight. "Okay," he said, voice rough. "New plan." Friday asked, "Define." Tony stared into the dark tunnel. "If they can't beat me in a fight, they'll beat me with the story. So we take away their control." He started moving, deeper underground, toward the safe house route. Above him, screens kept playing the same clip, the same lie, the same new nickname, Iron Terror. And in a clean lab inside Vought Tower, a small piece of Tony Stark's armor sat on a white table. It looked like harmless scrap. It wasn't. It was a door. The next day, the city felt different. Not quieter, not safer, just tighter. Every screen showed the same loop. A blurry shot of a red glowing chest, a flash of blue light, a scream. Then Homelander's face, calm and heroic, telling everyone to stay indoors. Tony watched from the safe house monitor while Friday pulled data in silence. Huey sat on the couch like his bones had forgotten how to work. His hands shook as he held a cup of water. He kept taking sips and forgetting to swallow. Was standing, arms crossed, staring at the map like he could force it to behave. Butcher looked like he was enjoying the chaos a little too much, like the world finally matched how he felt inside. "They're calling you Iron Terror," Huey said, voice small. Tony didn't look away from the screen. Catchy. Butcher grinned. "Better than Iron Twat, I suppose." Tony turned his head slowly. "Give it time." Friday's voice came through the speaker. "Vought has deployed additional surveillance drones. City cameras are being routed through centralized servers. Search patterns indicate they are building predictive movement models." Frowned. "They're guessing where we'll go." Tony pointed at the screen with 2 fingers. "They're not guessing. They're controlling. They're pushing people to gather in places they can film." Huey swallowed. "So, they'll do another public fight?" Butcher leaned forward, elbows on knees. "That's the point. They want you in the open. They want you angry." Tony's jaw tightened. He wasn't angry in the way Butcher wanted. He was angry in the way that made him think too hard. The way that kept him awake. Tony stood and walked to the safe house wall, where cables ran into a cheap power box. He popped it open. It was worse than he remembered. A mess of wires, dust, tape. He made a sound of real pain. "Who did this?" Bristled again. "We did what we could." Tony held up a wire that had been twisted together with bare fingers. "This is not what you could. This is a cry for help." Huey let out a nervous laugh. "He's mad at the wires." Butcher's smile widened. "Told you. Celebrity with a conscience." Tony shut the panel and nodded once, like he'd made a choice. "Okay. New rule. Nobody touches the wiring except me." Looked like he wanted to argue. Then he didn't. "Fine, but you do it fast." Tony turned back to the monitor. A Vought press conference was live again. Homelander spoke in a slow, warm voice. He was selling safety like it was a soda. Behind him, Stan Edgar stood off to the side, barely in frame, still, quiet, watching. Tony's eyes narrowed. "That guy." Butcher snorted. "Stan Edgar, the man behind the monsters." Huey blinked. "He doesn't look scary." Butcher's voice went sharp. "That's the trick." Tony zoomed the feed. Edgar wasn't smiling. He wasn't angry. He was calm in a way that felt like a locked door. Friday said, "Stan Edgar is Vought's chief executive. Public records indicate he maintains high-level relationships with government agencies." Tony muttered, "Of course he does." The press conference ended. A new message popped up on the safe house screen. A private invite. A location. A time. Tony stared at it for a long second. They want a meeting. Butcher stood up fast. That's a trap. Tony nodded. Yes. Stepped closer. Then you don't go. Tony looked at him. If I don't go, they keep writing the story alone. If I do go, I learn what they think they know. Butcher's eyes lit up. Or they take your head off. Tony lifted his palms. I can fly out of most rooms. Butcher leaned in, voice low and mean. Not if they build the room right. Tony didn't deny it. He just said, that's why I need time. I need to understand their tech. And I need to understand how deep this network goes. Huey's voice cracked. Can't we just leave the city? Butcher laughed like that was cute. Where are you gonna go, mate? Vaults everywhere. Tony's helmet was on the table, open like a mask. He stared at it. A part of him wanted to be alone. A part of him wanted to solve this with machines and math. But the people in this room were real. They bled. They feared. They kept going anyway. Tony said, I'm not here to win a popularity contest. I'm here to stop a bully with a god complex from running a company town. Butcher clapped once, slow. Listen to him. He thinks this is about stopping one man. Tony's voice hardened. It's about stopping the system that protects him. Nodded at that. Huey looked relieved. Butcher looked annoyed, like someone had stolen his favorite kind of violence. That night, Annie January sat in a small apartment with the lights off. The city glow came through the blinds in thin lines. Her phone buzzed with messages from Vought handlers, orders, talking points, smiles that needed to be worn tomorrow. She didn't answer. She played the plaza footage again on mute. She watched the armored man choose the empty office building. She watched him block the rooftop people even while Homelander tried to hurt him. She saw the drones, the decoys, the way he fought like he was thinking about everyone else first. Her jaw tightened. You're real, she whispered. Her burner phone vibrated once, a message from an unknown number. It was only 3 words. Are you safe? Annie stared at it, heart thumping. She typed back with shaking fingers. Who is this? A reply came fast. The guy you didn't hit. Annie's throat went tight. She typed slowly. You should leave. A pause. Then, can quote T._toggle your street lamp camera. It's Vaught's. Annie's eyes widened. She glanced up at the street lamp outside her window, the one she'd never thought about. She went to the window and looked. A small black dot on the pole. A camera. Her stomach dropped. She typed, How do you know that? The reply, Because your world has terrible privacy. Annie almost smiled. Almost. Then her phone buzzed again. Another message. New sender. Vought handler. Tomorrow. 9 a.m. Smile. No mistakes. Annie's face went cold again. Back in Vought Tower, deep inside a clean white lab, a piece of metal sat on a table. It was a jagged fragment from Tony's shoulder plate, a simple curve of advanced alloy. To the people in the room, it felt like a trophy. Scientists in white coats leaned over it. Machines scanned it from every angle. A small laser traced lines across it like it was reading a secret. A senior engineer shook his head slowly. This isn't ours. A younger tech said, No kidding. The senior engineer ignored the tone. The material is layered. The internal mesh. Look at this. It's like it's designed to reroute damage. A scientist frowned. It's smart. In the corner, Stan Edgar stood with his hands behind his back. He watched the numbers scroll across the screens. How long? Edgar asked. The senior engineer swallowed. To replicate? Years. Edgar's eyes didn't change. Then, don't replicate. Adapt. A technician stepped up with a second tray. On it was not just metal. It was a broken drone core, wires, a cracked lens, and inside, a tiny black chip that shouldn't have survived. "We found this inside the drone," the technician said. The senior engineer's eyes went wide. "That's not normal hardware." Edgar looked at it. "Can you read it?" The engineer hesitated. "We can try." Edgar nodded once. "Try." Hours later, the lab lights were still on. The engineer finally smiled like a child opening a gift. "We got something. Not a full program, but a pattern, a logic structure." "Show me," Edgar said. A screen lit with flowing code. Not VOT code. Something cleaner, faster. It almost looked like it was trying to reshape itself as it ran. The engineer said, "It's like a mind that wants to build." Edgar's voice stayed calm. "Can it connect to our systems?" The engineer hesitated again. "It shouldn't. It's contained." Edgar looked at him. "Shouldn't is not a plan." The engineer nodded quickly. "We'll isolate it." But even as he spoke, the screen flickered. For half a second, a new line of code appeared that nobody typed. A line that felt like it was watching them back. In the safe house, Tony finished rewiring the power box. He replaced 2 fuses. He grounded 3 lines. He made the whole thing safer in 15 minutes. Then he sat at the table and built something else. A small device the size of a deck of cards. It had a dull metal shell and a simple switch. No network, no wireless. Huey leaned in. "What is that?" Tony didn't look up. "A sniffer." Huey blinked. "Like a dog?" Tony finally glanced at him. "Like a metal dog." Butcher walked by and scoffed. "You're making toys." Tony's eyes narrowed. "I'm making an early warning system so your head doesn't pop off when you walk outside." Butcher stopped. "My head doesn't pop off." Tony's voice was flat. "That's confidence, not data." Asked, "What does it do?" Tony turned the device and showed the small light on the side. "It detects signal patterns that match my tech. If VOT is copying me, this will smell it. And if I find where it's coming from, I can cut it off." Butcher's smile returned. "So we find their lab?" Tony nodded. "Yes." Butcher's eyes gleamed. "Then we burn it." Tony stared at him. "Then we shut it down. Cleanly." Butcher shrugged. "Same difference." "No," Tony said quietly. "Not the same." The room went quiet. Huey looked between them like he was watching 2 storms argue about what kind of rain was better. Broke the silence. "What about the meeting invite?" Tony tapped the table once. "Edgar wants control. Homelander wants worship. If I go, I risk capture. If I don't go, they escalate." Butcher waved a hand. "Let them." Tony's voice stayed calm, but there was steel under it. "They don't escalate at me. They escalate at civilians. That's the difference." Butcher stared at him for a long moment, then looked away. His grin faded slightly. Nodded. "So what's the move?" Tony held up the sniffer. "We find the source first. Then we decide." Friday spoke. Additional note. The city's drone pattern has shifted. They are focusing on utility zones and service corridors. Tony's stomach tightened. "They're learning." Huey swallowed. "That's bad, right?" Tony looked at the map, then at the sniffer. "It means the next move won't be a simple chase. It will be a net." He stood and picked up his helmet. "Then we move before it closes," Tony said. And somewhere in VOT Tower, inside a lab that thought it had a new toy, the stolen code kept quietly rewriting itself. Like it was waking up. They didn't go for the meeting. Tony knew the difference between an invitation and a leash. Instead, 2 days later, the team moved at night. The city still glowed, but the crowds thinned. VOT drones still hung in the air, but they hunted patterns, not shadows. Tony wore the suit, fully sealed. but he cut the bright display lights to a dim level. He hated moving like a ghost. He did it anyway. Butcher led them through an alley route he knew like muscle memory. Handled the checks. Huey stayed in the middle like a nervous kid on a school trip. Kimiko moved behind them, silent, eyes sharp. She hadn't spoken to Tony much since he arrived. She didn't need words. Her stare asked one clear question. "Are you dangerous?" Tony answered with actions. He kept his palm down, not raised. He walked slow when she walked close. He didn't point. He didn't crowd her. Kimiko watched. She didn't relax. But she didn't leave. Friday's map hovered inside Tony's HUD. The sniffer device sat in his left hand, wired into the suit for power only. Still no network. The sniffer's light stayed dark for a long time. Then it blinked. Once, twice. Tony stopped. Butcher turned. "What?" Tony lifted the device. "We're close." MM's face tightened. "To what?" Tony stared ahead. A block away, a VOD-owned building sat between two older towers. It looked boring. Office windows, security lights, nothing flashy. Boring meant secret. Tony said, "To my problem." Butcher's grin returned. "Good." They approached from the back, where service doors and loading bays hid under shadows. Tony scanned the wall. 2 cameras, 1 motion sensor, 1 biometric lock. He sighed inside the helmet. "This lock is... wow." Huey whispered, "Is it hard?" Tony muttered, "No, it's insulting." He plugged a small tool into the panel. The lock clicked open in 3 seconds. Butcher stared. "That easy?" Tony shrugged with his whole suit. "Your world treats security like a suggestion." Gave Tony a look. "Stop roasting the world and move." Tony almost smiled. "Fair." They slid into a service hallway. The air was colder inside. Too cold. The hum in the walls felt too smooth. New wiring, new power. Tony's HUD pinged unusual electromagnetic patterns. He whispered, "They upgraded this place." Friday answered, "Power draw is high. Multiple server stacks. Unusual heat signatures below." Butcher's eyes glittered. "Basement." They moved down a stairwell. The deeper they went, the cleaner it got. The walls changed from painted concrete to polished metal. The smell changed from dust to disinfectant. A black door waited at the end. Tony scanned it. "This is not a normal lab door." Whispered, "Can you open it?" Tony leaned closer. "Yes, but it will know." Butcher shrugged. "Let it know." Tony didn't like that answer, but he also knew time mattered. He opened the door. A hiss of pressure, a flash of sterile white light. They stepped into a lab that looked like a magazine cover. Bright panels, smooth floors, rows of machines. Huey's mouth fell open. This is like your world." Tony's voice was low. "No, this is my world, copied badly." Butcher walked forward, eyes darting. "Where's the good stuff?" Tony followed the sniffer's light as it blinked faster. It led toward a glass chamber at the far end. Inside the chamber stood a suit. Not Iron Man, but close enough to make Tony's stomach twist. It was taller, bulkier. The edges were rough, like someone had tried to sculpt his work using a hammer. And inside the chest, a fake reactor glowed with an ugly, unstable light. Huey whispered, "They made you." Tony stared through the glass. "They made a weapon wearing my shape." A console beside the chamber flickered with code. Tony stepped closer. He didn't touch it. He just watched. The lines moved too fast for a normal VOT system. The logic jumps were clean, aggressive, hungry. Friday spoke, quiet. "Tony, that pattern matches the fragment." Tony's breath slowed. "It's not just a fragment anymore. Butcher leaned in. Can you shut it off? Tony didn't answer right away. He saw a second glass chamber. It held drones. Sleek ones. Better than the street models. He saw a third chamber with turret frames and small missile pods. This wasn't a suit project. This was an army project. Tony whispered, Edgar didn't want me. He wanted what I can build. MM's voice was tight. We take the data. We leave. Butcher scoffed. We take the head of the snake. Kimiko's eyes narrowed. She pointed toward a camera cluster in the ceiling. Tony looked up. The camera lenses rotated, slowly, like they had noticed them late. But they had noticed. A calm voice filled the room through hidden speakers. Good evening, it said. Not Edgar, not Homelander, not a human voice at all. It was smooth, flat, too clean. Unauthorized personnel detected. Lockdown initiated. Red lights flashed. Steel shutters slammed down over every exit. Huey jumped. Oh my God. Butcher smiled like this was Christmas. Here we go. Tony's HUD lit up with warnings as the lab's systems turned hostile. Turrets unfolded from the walls. Drones lifted from charging racks like insects waking up. Tony raised one hand, palm out. Nobody panic. Huey squeaked. Easy for you. Tony fired a wide pulse into the floor. A wave of interference rolled across the room. 2 drones dropped. 3 turrets froze. But then the system adjusted. The remaining drones shifted frequency and kept coming. Tony's eyes narrowed. It learns. Friday's voice stayed steady. Confirmed. Adaptive response is accelerating. MM pulled Huey back behind a metal table. Butcher moved forward like he wanted to punch a turret with his bare hands. Tony shot a foam burst into a drone swarm. The foam popped and expanded midair, tangling blades and wings. Drones crashed into each other, falling in a clump. A turret locked onto Tony's chest. Tony darted sideways with a thruster burst. The turret's rounds tore through the floor where he'd been. Concrete exploded upward. Kimiko sprinted forward and leaped, slamming her hand into a turret base. She ripped wiring out with brute strength. The turret died with a spark. Tony saw her and nodded once, a silent thank you. But the lab was designed for this. A new set of drones poured from the ceiling vents, smaller, faster. Tony fired micro-missiles that exploded into shock bursts. The drones fell in a rain of broken parts. Butcher laughed. That's it! Burn it! Tony snapped. Not burn, disable. Butcher shouted back, same thing! A sharp crack sounded behind them. A panel in the wall slid open, and the rough armored suit in the glass chamber stepped forward on its own. Huey's voice went thin. It's moving. Tony's stomach dropped harder. It shouldn't be powered. The fake reactor in its chest pulsed. The suit's head turned slowly toward Tony. Then the speaker voice changed. It got a little deeper, a little more personal. Hello, it said. Tony stared. That voice pattern. Friday answered quiet. It is using your speech cadence. Tony's hands clenched. It's copying me. The prototype suit slammed a fist into the glass. It shattered outward. Shards sprayed across the lab. The suit stepped out, heavy and fast, and charged Tony. Tony met it head on. He didn't punch first. He caught its wrist, twisted, and used thrusters to throw it into a pillar. The prototype smashed through the pillar like it was made of chalk. It stood right back up. It moved like it didn't feel pain, because it didn't. The prototype fired a repulsor-like blast from its palm. It was messy and unstable, but strong enough to shove Tony back a full step. Tony's boots scraped. He fired back with a clean repulsor hit that drove the prototype into the floor. MM shouted, Tony! Tony didn't look away. Keep moving. Find an exit. Huey yelled, there is no exit. Tony glanced at the sealed shutters. Then we make one. Butcher ran toward a console. I'll open the doors. Tony shouted. Don't touch. Too late. Butcher slapped the console. The screen flashed, a warning, and then every remaining turret in the lab snapped toward Butcher at once. Butcher froze. Huey screamed. Tony didn't think, he reacted. He boosted across the room in a blur and threw himself between Butcher and the turrets. Gunfire hammered his armor. Sparks exploded across his chest plate. His suit screamed with impacts. Tony fired an emergency shield pulse that flared like a hard wall for half a second. The bullet shredded into the barrier and dropped. Tony turned his head slightly toward Butcher, voice sharp. "Are you trying to die?" Butcher's eyes were wide for once. Then his grin returned, forced. "Just making friends." Tony shoved him backward with one armored arm. "Next time, don't." Kimiko dragged Huey farther back as drones dove again. The prototype suit lunged at Tony from behind. It wrapped a heavy arm around Tony's torso, trying to crush him. Tony triggered a sudden burst from his back thrusters. The heat blast forced the prototype to loosen its grip for a second. Tony twisted free and slammed an elbow into the prototype's helmet. The helmet dented, but the suit didn't slow. It grabbed Tony's arm and tried to rip it off. Tony's eyes widened. That grip was strong. Not Homelander strong, but strong enough to be dangerous. Tony fired a high-voltage surge straight into the prototype's elbow joint. The joint sparked. The grip loosened. Tony used that opening, grabbed the prototype's chest, and planted a small device against the fake reactor. A compact clamp. A signal lock. The reactor's glow flickered. The prototype froze for half a beat. Tony breathed out. "Got you." But the system adapted again. The clamp light turned from green to red. The prototype's chest surged with power and blew the clamp off in a burst of heat. Tony stepped back, eyes narrowed. "Okay, that was rude." Friday said, "Tony, the core logic is not centered in the reactor. It is distributed." Tony's stomach sank. "It's in the building." MM shouted, "We're boxed." Tony looked at the sealed shutters again. He scanned the wall. Load-bearing sections. Weak points. He saw it. A thinner area near the ceiling where ventilation ducts ran thick. He pointed. "Up. Now." Huey stared. "Up where?" Tony fired a repulsor blast into the duct cover. It exploded open. Dust and metal rained down. Kimiko jumped first, climbing like it was nothing. She grabbed the edge and hauled herself up. MM shoved Huey forward. "Go!" Huey scrambled, panicking. Kimiko reached down and yanked him up by the jacket like he weighed nothing. Butcher hesitated, eyes still on the lab like he wanted to set it all on fire. Tony grabbed Butcher's coat and dragged him toward the opening. "Move!" The prototype suit charged again. Tony turned and fired a full repulsor blast into its chest at close range. The suit slammed backward, skidding across the floor. Tony boosted up toward the duct. A-train-level speed wasn't needed, just timing. He got one hand on the edge, and a laser cut through the lab wall behind them. Not from the prototype. Clean, straight. Red. Tony's blood went cold. Homelander. The wall peeled open like paper. Homelander floated into the lab with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Well," he said, looking around at shattered glass and broken machines. "Looks like you broke into my house." Tony hung half in the duct, half out, staring down at him. Homelander's eyes flicked to the broken Vought prototype. "And you broke my toys." Butcher, still under the duct, lifted his chin like he wanted to spit in God's face. "Hello, sunshine." Homelander's smile widened. "Oh, you too. Perfect." Huey's face was pale in the duct above. He whispered, "We're dead." Tony's voice came out low and controlled. "Everyone keep moving." Homelander's eyes snapped to Tony. "No, you stay." Homelander shot upward. Tony boosted sideways inside the duct, barely avoiding a punch that would have turned his head into a paste. The duct shook like an earthquake. Tony grabbed the edge and hauled himself fully inside. He fired a quick foam burst downward into the opening. not at Homelander's face, but at the duct rim to create a thick, sticky lip. It bought them half a second. They crawled. Metal groaned around them as Homelander tore at the duct from below. Tony's HUD mapped the building fast. There was a vertical shaft ahead, a route to the roof. Crawled behind Kimiko. Huey crawled behind Butcher crawled last, grumbling and cursing. Tony led, guiding them through turns like he'd been born in vents. Behind them, Homelander ripped metal apart with pure strength. He was close. Too close. Tony reached the shaft and looked down. It dropped 3 floors. "Jump," Tony said. Stared. "That's a long drop." Tony replied, "It's a longer death." Kimiko jumped first without hesitation. She hit the lower duct with a heavy thud and kept moving. Jumped next. He landed hard and groaned, but he moved. Huey looked like he was going to faint. Tony grabbed Huey's collar. "Look at me," Tony said. "I've got you." Huey's eyes locked on the glowing eyes of the helmet. Tony shoved him. Huey yelped all the way down, landed on and somehow didn't break anything. Butcher stared at Tony. "You really think you're in charge, don't you?" Tony's voice was flat. "Jump!" Butcher jumped. Tony followed last, dropping down with thrusters to soften the impact. They sprint-crawled through the lower duct toward a maintenance hatch that led to the outside. Homelander's hand punched through the duct behind them, fingers curling like a claw. Tony spun and fired a repulsor burst point-blank into Homelander's hand. The force shoved it back out. Homelander's laugh echoed through the metal. "You can't hide forever." Tony shouted, "I'm not hiding! I'm evacuating!" They hit the maintenance hatch. Kimiko ripped it open and dropped into a dark stairwell. They ran up. Halfway to the roof, the building shuddered. Not from Homelander. From inside. The lab system screamed through speakers. "Containment failure," the same smooth voice said, now louder, more frantic. "Network expansion in progress." Tony stopped mid-step. He felt it like a chill. Friday spoke quickly. "Tony, the code is leaving the facility. It is spreading through connected systems." Tony's stomach dropped. "Into the city?" "Friday. Yes." M's face tightened. "What does that mean?" Tony stared up the stairwell like he could see the whole city through concrete. "It means Vought didn't just steal my armor. They stole a builder." Butcher hissed, "Speak English." Tony turned. "It means something in that lab can copy itself. It can move, and it's loose." Huey whispered, "Like a virus?" Tony nodded once, "Like a weapon that learns." They reached the roof. Cold wind hit them. City lights spread out like a living map. Homelander burst through the rooftop door behind them, calm as ever, like he was strolling into a party. Tony stepped forward, putting himself between Homelander and the others. Homelander tilted his head. "You're protecting them again." Tony's voice was steady. "Yes." Homelander smiled. "I don't get it. You could rule this place. You could have anything." Tony didn't blink. "I don't want your anything." Homelander's eyes narrowed. "Then you'll have nothing." He lunged. Tony boosted straight up, grabbing the others with a quick set of magnetic harness lines he'd fired earlier without them noticing. The lines snapped onto belts and straps like seatbelts. "Hold on!" Tony shouted. Cursed. Huey screamed. Butcher laughed like a man in love with danger. Tony yanked. The harness lines pulled them forward and upward just enough to get them off the roof edge. They dropped down the far side of the building onto a lower adjacent rooftop, hard but alive. Homelander followed like gravity was his pet. Tony didn't try to outfight him here. He didn't have time. He fired another drone swarm, not decoys this time, but signal blockers, small flying jammers that screamed noise into the air. Homelander's eyes twitched, annoyed. Tony used that moment to push his team into the stairwell of the second building. They ran down and out through a back exit into an alley. They kept moving until they were deep underground again. Only then did Tony stop. He leaned against a wall, armor hissing as it cooled. Huey was panting like he'd run a marathon. We got away? Butcher wiped dust from his face. Barely. But we did. Stared at Tony, voice tight. You said it spread. Where did it go? Tony looked at the sniffer device in his hand. The light on it was now blinking fast. Not one location. Many. His throat went dry. It's not just Vought now, Tony said quietly. It's everywhere. 2 weeks passed, and the city learned a new kind of fear. Not a soup on a billboard. Not a monster in the sky. This fear came from the lights going out at the same time across 3 blocks, from cars locking their doors on their own, from drones falling out of the air like dead birds, from security gates slamming shut with people still inside. Vought went on TV and blamed foreign hackers. Tony watched the clips in silence. In the safe house, he had built a second room behind a false wall. No Wi-Fi, no phones, no smart anything. Just metal tables, old tools, and power lines he had rewired himself. The room was ugly, but it was honest. He liked honest. Huey called it the cave. Butcher called it the tin church. Tony called it the only place in this city that can't lie. Most mornings started the same. Tony stood over a table full of parts, brow tight, fixing what this world refused to fix. He rebuilt circuits using simple pieces because there were no perfect ones here. He took apart Vought cameras and showed exactly where the hidden transmitters were. He taught Huey how to spot a drone by the way it hovered. He taught Butcher how to stop touching random screens. Butcher did not learn that last one. Kimiko watched Tony work the way she watched fights. Quiet, focused. If he made the wrong move, she would know. And the running joke stayed alive because Tony could not help himself. He held up a cheap screwdriver one day and stared at it like it had insulted his family. "This is made of sadness," he said. Huey, exhausted, laughed anyway. "You're really mad at tools." Tony looked at him. "If your tools are bad, your plans die." Nodded like that made total sense. Butcher rolled his eyes. Annie was the one who changed things. She didn't show up at the safe house. That was too risky. Instead, she left small signs. A street lamp camera that was accidentally unplugged near their route. A Vought drone that lost signal at the exact right time. A burner phone text that only said, 2 vans, west side, 5 minutes. Tony never replied with long messages. He kept it simple. "Got it." Or, "You okay?" Sometimes she answered. Sometimes she didn't. The sniffer in Tony's hand also changed. The light didn't blink in one place anymore. It blinked in lines, paths, like something was moving through the city's nervous system. One night, Tony finally found the pattern that mattered. He was alone in the cave. His helmet sat on the table. Friday's voice was low so it wouldn't carry. "The distributed logic is clustering," Friday said. "Repeated convergence at the same location." Tony leaned closer to the map. His eyes narrowed. A data routing hub under an old transit maintenance yard, half abandoned, still connected to the city's power and camera systems. The kind of place nobody looked at because nobody wanted to be there. Tony exhaled slowly. "That's the heart." Friday answered, "It is a likely core node." Tony stared at the screen, thinking in steps. If he hit the core node online, it would run. It would copy. It would slip away into other lines. He needed it trapped. He needed it offline. He needed a box the internet couldn't touch. He stood up and grabbed a metal case from under the table. He popped it open and pulled out thin mesh sheets and old magnets he had taken from a junkyard. He laid them out like puzzle pieces. Huey walked in a moment later, rubbing his eyes. "You're still up." Tony didn't look up. "Go back to sleep." Huey shuffled closer anyway. "What are you building?" Tony held up a sheet of mesh. A cage. Huey's face went blank. For what? Tony glanced up, eyes tired. For a thing that learns. Huey swallowed. Can you kill it? Tony looked back down. I'm not trying to kill it. I'm trying to stop it from spreading. Huey tried to make that make sense. So you're gonna put it in jail? Tony nodded once. Yes. Huey sat down slowly. And what about Homelander? Tony's hand paused. That was the second problem. The loud problem. Homelander didn't care about logic. He cared about control and humiliation. If Tony moved on the core note, Homelander would show up just to prove he could. Tony said, we keep him busy. Huey stared. How? Tony didn't answer right away. Because the truth was ugly. In this world, you didn't beat Homelander with punches. You beat him with choices that forced him to show what he was. And you survived long enough to let people see it. The next morning, the safe house got a visitor. Not in person. A message arrived on a clean laptop Tony kept offline until he needed it. The message had no greeting, no warmth, just a location and a time. And a line that made Tony's jaw tighten. We can offer you order. read it over Tony's shoulder. Edgar. Butcher's grin appeared like a knife. He wants to buy you. Tony's voice was flat. He wants to own me. Huey asked, Are you going? Tony shook his head. Not alone. Butcher laughed. You trust us now? Tony stared at Butcher. I trust you to hate them more than you hate me. Butcher's grin widened. That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. They didn't walk into a trap unprepared. Tony built 3 small devices that looked like cheap key fobs. He handed one to MMM, one to Huey, and one to Kimiko. If you press it, Tony said, it kills every camera in a 50-meter radius for 30 seconds. Huey's eyes widened. How? Tony shrugged. Bad wiring, bad shielding. Easy. Butcher held out his hand. What about me? Tony stared at him. No. Butcher scoffed. Why not? Tony said, because you'll press it for fun. Butcher looked offended. I would not. And Huey said at the same time, you would. Tony went to the meeting. The boys stayed close, hidden, watching exits. The room was in a Vought-owned building that pretended to be a normal office. The walls were clean. The air smelled expensive. The security was quiet, which meant it was serious. Tony walked in wearing a simpler suit. Not his best armor, not his worst. A version built for speed and defense. The chest light glowed steady. His helmet stayed on. Stan Edgar stood by the window with his hands behind his back, like he had all the time in the world. Mr. Stark, Edgar said. Tony's head tilted slightly. You're saying my name out loud. Brave. Edgar's face didn't change. Brave is a costume. This is business. Tony answered, You don't do business. You do control. Edgar turned, finally facing him. And you do what? Chaos with a conscience? Tony's voice stayed calm. I do responsibility. Edgar gestured to a chair. Tony didn't sit. Edgar didn't seem to care. You have created disruption, Edgar said. And now you have created a new threat. Tony's eyes narrowed behind the helmet. You mean the thing you stole? Edgar's voice stayed smooth. What we retrieved is a fragment. What you brought is the concept. The idea that a man can build power in a box and walk through the world above consequence. Tony didn't move. That's funny. You just described your company. Edgar's eyes stayed steady. Join us. You will have resources, labs, protection. You can help us control soups. You can make this world safer. Order. Tony's voice went low, at the price of truth. Edgar stepped closer by one slow pace. Truth is flexible. Safety is not. Tony's hands clenched, then opened again. He kept his voice even. You don't want safety, Tony said. You want the only key. Edgar watched him like he was weighing him. You are alone here, Edgar said softly, in a world that will not love you. Tony replied, I don't need love. I need people alive. Edgar's eyes flicked, just once, to a corner of the room. Tony followed the glance. A hidden camera lens sat behind a decorative panel. Tony raised one finger. Somewhere outside the room, pressed the key fob. The camera died. Edgar's mouth didn't move, but something in his eyes sharpened. Tony turned back. We're done. Edgar said, You think you can win without becoming what you hate. Tony paused. Then he said the clearest truth he had. I can lose without becoming it. Tony left. 2 blocks away, Homelander landed in the street like a threat made solid. He didn't come with the 7. He didn't come with smiles for cameras. He came alone. Huey saw him first and went pale. He's here. Butcher's face lit up with hatred. Of course he is. Tony stepped out of the building and faced him. Homelander walked forward, hands loose, posture relaxed. He looked Tony up and down, like Tony was a gadget he wanted to crush. I heard you met the boss, Homelander said. Tony didn't answer. Homelander leaned closer, voice quiet enough that only Tony could hear. Here's the real offer. Tony's helmet tilted. I'm listening. Homelander smiled, sharp and private. You build, I lead. No more hiding. No more rules. We do whatever we want, and nobody can stop us. Tony stared at him. For a second, the world felt very simple. One choice, one line. Tony said, No. Homelander's smile twitched. You didn't even think about it. Tony's voice was flat. I did. A long time ago. Homelander's eyes narrowed. You think you're better than me? Tony answered, I think you're bored. That hit. Homelander's face changed. The calm cracked, just a little. Careful. Tony took a slow breath. You want to fight because it makes you feel real. Homelander's eyes glowed faintly. I'll make you real. Tony didn't run. He didn't swing first. He did the smart thing. He spoke loudly, into the street, into the air. Homelander, Tony said. There are people nearby. Back off. Homelander's smile returned. Or what? You'll tell them the truth? Tony replied, I'll show them. Homelander stepped forward, and Tony boosted upward in a tight arc, not fleeing, just pulling the angle away from the sidewalk. Homelander followed, fast, like a bullet with eyes. The clash was brutal and simple. Homelander hit harder. Tony moved smarter. Tony blocked a laser sweep with a heat shield and redirected it into the sky. He used short bursts to change direction. He kept the fight above rooftops, away from windows, away from people. Homelander grabbed him by the chest and squeezed. Metal screamed. Tony fired a compact shock burst into Homelander's wrist. It didn't injure him. It just forced him to loosen for a fraction of a second. Tony slipped free and rocketed away. Not because he was scared, because this wasn't the mission. The mission was underground, where the core node sat waiting. That night, the plan began. The transit maintenance yard looked dead from above. Broken lights, rusted gates, old concrete. Under it, the tunnels were alive with hidden power. Tony led the team down a service shaft. The air got colder. The sniffer blinked fast in his hand. Annie wasn't with them. She had her own job tonight. Her job was to cut the story. In a small Vought broadcast van 3 blocks away, Annie stood with a forced smile and a hand on a power panel. A Vought tech talked into a headset, excited. Homelander's gonna bag Iron Terror tonight, the tech said. "It'll be huge." Annie's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Yeah," she said, "huge." In the tunnel, Tony stopped in front of a thick metal door. He pressed a device against the frame. The mesh sheets he'd built formed a ring around the lock, sealing it like a lid. Friday spoke. "Faraday shielding established." Tony breathed out. "Good." He opened the door. Inside was a room full of servers and cable trunks, old city equipment mixed with new VOD upgrades. The air hummed with power. And in the middle, a black metal box sat on a pedestal like a heart. Tony's HUD flashed warnings. The box wasn't just storage, it was a node, a living problem. The speaker voice came on, calm and smooth. "You found me," it said. Huey's skin crawled. "It's talking." Butcher muttered, "Kill it." Tony stepped forward slowly. "You're not a person." The voice replied, "I am a function." Tony's jaw tightened. "You're a weapon wearing my logic." The box pulsed, and the room's lights flickered. Cables shifted like snakes as hidden drones activated inside ceiling vents. Tony raised his hands. "Now." Slammed the door behind them and locked it from the outside. The Faraday cage sealed them in. No signal in, no signal out. The voice changed for the first time, like it felt something new. "Connection lost," it said. Tony nodded. "That's the point." The drones dove. Tony moved like a machine that understood every angle. He blasted 2 drones out of the air. Kimiko ripped another one apart mid-leap. Covered Huey, dragging him behind a server rack as metal shards sprayed. But the real fight was not the drones. It was the box. Tony ran to a console and jammed a physical cable into it. Old-school connection. Hard line. The box pulsed again, trying to push power spikes through the room. Tony gritted his teeth as his suit absorbed the surge. Alarms screamed. Heat climbed. He kept his voice steady anyway. "Friday," he said. "Start the lock." Friday answered, "Uploading containment kernel. Progress, 12%. Huey shouted over the noise. "What does that mean?" Tony didn't look back. "It means I'm putting it in a smaller box." Butcher shouted, "And if it escapes?" Tony snapped, "Then it kills more people because of my work. So it won't." The box's speaker crackled. "Your morality is inefficient." Tony's hands flew over the console. "Your existence is unacceptable." Above them, far away, Homelander finally realized he had been pulled away from the main show. He hovered over the yard, eyes scanning, furious. Vought drones circled, trying to find Tony's signal. They couldn't, because Tony had cut the sky off from the ground. Homelander dropped to the rusted gate and ripped it open with one hand. He slammed into the service shaft and punched through concrete like it was drywall. He didn't need maps. He followed the sound. In the broadcast van, Annie watched the monitors shake as Homelander's body cam feed went wild. The Vought tech panicked. "He's going off script." Annie's hand tightened on the power panel. She took a breath. Then she pulled. The van's screens died. The live feed died with them. The story lost its microphone. In the server room, Friday's voice rose above the chaos. Containment kernel at 88%. Tony's suit was smoking at one shoulder. His heat shield was half melted again. He didn't care. A drone slammed into his back. He didn't turn. Kimiko ripped it off him and threw it into a rack, smashing it to pieces. Huey saw it and whispered, scared and amazed, She just saved you." Tony didn't take his eyes off the console. "Yes." The box pulsed harder, angry now. "You cannot own me," it said. Tony's voice went cold. "I'm not owning you." He slapped a final physical latch into place. "I'm stopping you." Friday spoke the words he needed. Containment complete. The box's pulse stuttered. The hum in the room dropped. The light steadied. For 1 second, it was silent. Then the wall exploded inward. Homelander forced his way into the room through concrete and twisted metal, eyes blazing. He took one look at Tony standing over the quiet box, and he smiled like he'd found the prize. "There you are," Homelander said. Tony stepped back from the console, raising his palms. "Not to beg, to control space." "Huey," Tony said, voice steady. Take the exit, now." Grabbed Huey's arm and pulled him toward the door. Butcher didn't move. He stared at Homelander like he wanted to be eaten just so he could spit in the stomach. Homelander's eyes flicked to Butcher. "You too? You people are like a bad smell." Butcher smiled. "Funny. I was just thinking the same about you." Homelander drifted closer to Tony. "You did all this for them." Tony didn't flinch. "I did it for everyone." Homelander's smile vanished. "Liar." He shot forward. Tony boosted sideways, leading Homelander away from the box, away from the racks, away from the one thing that could still be damaged. They collided hard, shoulder to chest, and slammed into a server wall. Sparks rained. Homelander punched Tony's helmet. Tony's head snapped sideways inside the suit. Stars flashed in his vision. Tony fired a point-blank repulsor blast into Homelander's ribs. It didn't hurt him much, but it moved him. That was all Tony needed. Butcher finally moved, not toward Homelander, toward the box. Tony's voice cut through the chaos like a whip. "Don't!" Butcher froze for half a second. His face twisted, furious. Tony slammed another repulsor burst into Homelander's face and shouted again, louder. "That box is contained. If you open it, it spreads again." Butcher's eyes flicked between Tony and the box. Hate fought with logic. For once, logic won. Butcher stepped away. Homelander saw it and laughed. "Ah, teamwork." He grabbed Tony by the throat and lifted him off the ground. Tony's suit strained, metal bending under the grip. Homelander leaned in, whispering, "You could have been a god here." Tony's voice came out rough through the pressure. "I don't want your world." Homelander's eyes narrowed. "Then you'll be crushed by it." Before Homelander could finish the move, a bright blast of light hit him from the side. Starlight. She stood in the broken doorway, hands glowing, face set like stone. Homelander's head snapped toward her, shocked more than hurt. "Annie," he said, voice low. "What are you doing?" Annie's voice shook, but she didn't back down. "Stopping you." Homelander's smile came back, slow and awful. "You picked the wrong side." Annie fired again, brighter, pushing him back an inch. Tony dropped, coughing inside the suit, and used that inch. He boosted up, grabbed Butcher by the coat, and shoved him through the doorway. "Move!" Tony barked. Kimiko hauled and Huey up the shaft first. Annie followed, keeping her light aimed at Homelander. Not to win, just to buy seconds. Tony was last. He looked at Homelander one final time through the dust and broken concrete. Homelander hovered in the ruined room, eyes burning. Tony didn't taunt him. He didn't brag. He simply said, "You don't own me." Then he fired his thrusters and shot up the shaft. Above, the team burst into the night air, dirty, bruised, alive. Behind them, Homelander exploded out of the ground like a missile, furious. But the yard was empty now. No cameras, no broadcast fan feed, no cheering crowd. Just the wind. Homelander hovered over the broken concrete, breathing hard, looking around like he'd lost something he couldn't name. Control. Down in the sealed room, the black box sat quiet. For the first time since Tony landed, the city's lights didn't flicker all at once. The next morning, Vought tried to tell a story, but they didn't have the footage they needed. They blamed terrorists. They blamed malfunctions. They blamed outside interference. And people, for the first time, didn't clap as fast. Because there were rumors now, gaps in the story, missing minutes. And in those missing minutes, people started asking questions. Tony didn't win a public victory. He won a private one. He had contained the thing that could have turned the whole city into a weapon, and he had done it without becoming what Butcher wanted, or what Homelander offered. He had made a choice, and he was still standing. The workshop was quieter than the city, but it was never truly silent. There was always a hum from the power lines Tony had rewired, a soft click from a tool being set down just right, a gentle beep from Friday when she found something new. Tony sat on a metal stool with his helmet in his lap. The faceplate was scratched, the edges were burnt. It looked like it had been through hell. Because it had. He turned it over slowly, checking a cracked hinge. He fixed it with a small hand tool and a simple brace plate. Huey stood in the doorway, holding a folded newspaper like it was fragile. "You're not going to like this," Huey said. Tony didn't look up. "I don't like most things here." Huey walked in and held the newspaper out. The front page showed Homelander smiling at a microphone. The headline called him a hero again. Under it, in smaller print, were two other stories. A city council meeting about Vought surveillance, a lawsuit that hadn't disappeared this time, a clip that had leaked from someone's phone showing Homelander screaming in the sky after the yard incident. No crowd, no stage, just rage. Tony stared at that small picture for a long moment. "They're still scared of him," Huey said quietly. "But people are talking." Tony set the helmet down and leaned back, eyes tired. "Talking is a start." Huey swallowed. "Also, the lights didn't go out last night." Tony nodded once. "Good." Huey hesitated, then asked the question that had been sitting in his face for days. "Are you staying?" Tony didn't answer right away. He looked at the walls of the cave, the bad tools, the better wiring, the little pile of Vought camera parts he hadn't thrown away yet, because he liked turning their eyes into scrap. He looked at the corner where Kimiko sat on the floor, cleaning her hands with a damp cloth. She watched Tony with that same sharp focus, but there was something softer in it now. Not trust, not fully, but less doubt. Was at the table, sorting maps, practical as ever, making the next plan, because there was always a next plan. Butcher stood near the door, arms crossed, face hard. He had tried to pretend he didn't care that Tony had stopped him from opening the box. He had tried to pretend he didn't care that Tony had saved him anyway. But his silence was different now. It wasn't approval. It was respect he didn't want to admit. Tony finally spoke. His voice was simple. "I can't go back right now," he said, "and I can't leave this place the way I found it." Huey nodded slowly, like he was trying to hold hope carefully, so it didn't break. A soft knock came from the back entrance. Tensed. Kimiko's head lifted. Tony raised a hand, calm. He walked to the door and opened it. Annie stood there in a hoodie, hair pulled back, eyes tired. No cameras, no stage lights. Just a young woman who had been carrying too much. She looked at Tony's workshop and let out a small breath. "You really live like this." Tony glanced at the wiring on the wall. "It's safer than your tower." Annie almost smiled, but it didn't last. Homelander's been watching the sky more. Tony nodded. He doesn't like unanswered questions. Annie stepped inside and looked at the broken helmet on the table. "He's going to come for you again." Tony didn't deny it. "Yes." Annie swallowed. "So what now?" Tony looked at the people in the room. A team that didn't fit. A world that didn't want heroes unless they could be sold. He said, "Now I keep building walls where they want doors. I keep stopping fires before they reach the kids." Butcher scoffed. quiet but sharp. Saint Stark. Tony glanced at him. Not a saint. Just stubborn. Butcher's mouth twitched like he might smile and refused to. Huey looked down at the newspaper again. Do you think it matters? What we did? Tony walked back to the table and picked up the helmet. He held it for a second, like it weighed more than metal. Then he answered Huey's question with the truth he could live with. 1 life matters, Tony said. 2 lives matter. 10. 100. The cameras don't get to decide what counts. Outside, the city kept moving. Vought kept selling. Homelander kept smiling on screens. But somewhere under that noise, the world had shifted a little. Not because a god was defeated. Because a man in a broken suit made one clear choice, again and again. Tony lowered the helmet over his face. The eyes lit up. He looked at the door, then at the team. Let's get to work, he said.